I'm officially wrapping up my Bronze Age focus study from last week at this point. I actually had a lot of catching up to do because while I do love sitting and focusing and reading for 3 days, it does have me fall behind on other things. So Monday was a lot of catch up. But I want to wrap up and talk about the key takeaways that I had from this focus study and kind of give a summary of like my purpose for the study and just note some highlights of my 3 days of reading. I'm Quinn Moone, I write queer fairy tales, and I had a 3-day focus study of the Oxford Handbook of the Bronze Age Aegean. In my vlog, I kind of cover the book itself more and the sections and the kind of notes that I made verbally as I was reading. Some of it was like so it was just sassy. So it was a little surprising to see an essay with so much just like jabs and very clear call outs to fellow scholars. But you know, that is not my fight, not my debate. They can have at it and they figure themselves out. Instead, what I would like to do is go over the key items that I took away from the focus study. I won't be going through the specific like action items that I took because I took a note and then I have an associated action with it. If I did that, we'd kind of be here forever and I would be adding like context at every turn, and this is just the beginning. I'm going to continue this for the entire encyclopedia and then eventually transfer it to my Notion where I track all of my details. But first, let's start with why I even did this. The reason that I'm taking so much time to study the Bronze Age is because I eventually want to write a Bronze Age epic surrounding the collapse of the Bronze Age and by extension, the Trojan War. I'm an English major, I'm an amateur historian, everything is independent study and self-taught. So I'm doing my due diligence to properly understand the Bronze Age, not only in the Aegean and the relationship between the Aegean city-states, but also to the larger Bronze Age world. I want to focus on the Near East in Q4. And then eventually I kind of want to expand a little bit into Europe and the Asias because there was stuff happening over there too. We just don't understand it. However, the trade routes were so extensive. There must have been some form of communication between all of them. And because I'm writing a historical fantasy, not a narrative nonfiction, I want to add those elements to my story, but I don't know how, what the applications are. I don't even know what's going to end up in the final draft. I want to understand the art of the possible so that I can see everything that it could be and then refine it down to a more controlled scope. So that's why I'm studying the Bronze Age so in depth. I think what's going to end up happening, honestly, is that I'm going to write a scene, a key core scene for the story, and then I'm going to have like a supplemental essay for myself documenting the actual history and what happened, my modifications and why, and then maybe a third like just summary. I'm not sure yet, I haven't done it. But there are key aspects of the story that I know I want to change to fit my Quinn histories and my Quinn chronology that differ from the historical facts. Obviously, I'm writing a fantasy, not a nonfiction, but I still want to keep track of all of the changes that I've made and why, so that when I'm reading something and there's like a weird, like that's historically inaccurate, but why did I do that? I have a paper trail of why I made the decisions that I did. Complete overkill, but I enjoy that. That's the level of documentation that I love. And this is a personal project, so I absolutely can dedicate that time. I can spend 3 days of my life reading and pondering things, and it was some of the most fun 3 days that I've had, especially since my move. My move was so chaotic, so I'm really happy I got those 3 days to focus, and it was a lot of fun. And these are the key takeaways from those 3 days of reading. I ended up reading about 250 pages. Could I have read more? Absolutely. But I did end up with some supplemental articles as well, almost like 130, that are really helpful in the world that I'm building. Like I said, most of it will probably not make it into the story itself, but I will have the knowledge and it might impact some other aspects of it. So, key takeaways. This might sound absolutely obvious. Takeaway number 1, trade routes dictate who the big players are. I know it's obvious. I know that if you are way off the beaten path on the other side of a mountain and over a treacherous bridge, you probably won't be a critical point on the trade route, and therefore you will not have as much influence in the universe, the laws, the political landscape of all of these city-states. I know it's obvious, especially also if you don't have any economic output. But for some reason, that was something that just clicked in my head, and I'm like, and now I'm obsessed with trade routes. I need to understand the trade routes from a naval perspective, so the sea trade routes, the land trade routes, and I need to understand the economy and the relationships of all of these city-states, because I think that they're going to be changing in my Quinn world. I'm calling it the Quinn's histories. I think in Quinn's histories, they're going to have to shift because I want to create a certain kingdom to have like secondary or tertiary influence. And I think historically they don't. So I have to go and figure out these trade routes, which is a takeaway that I have, an action item. The trade routes dictate who the big players are, who the major ports are. If you are a coastal town, but you got a bunch of jagged rocks at your port, you probably will not be a large center of commerce. Instead, the town upstream that has a nice open bay will be the center of commerce. And I want to understand which of my kingdoms is going to have that, so I can see how the politics are going to play out. I have never written a political story. Like, politics is not something I ever include, but it's going to have to be to discuss the collapse of an entire civilizations, because the Bronze Age was kind of a big deal and the collapse of it was also a big deal. So that's key takeaway number 1. Key takeaway number 2, the Mycenaean civilization had a steep rise and rapid decline in the late Bronze Age. I did not realize that throughout the not only Neolithic, when everything was being set up, when the world was setting the foundations for what would become the Bronze Age in the Neolithic, I did not realize that the Mycenaean civilization didn't just slowly rise from early, mid to late Bronze Age, and then the later half of the late Bronze Age, it started to decline. No, the Mycenaean civilization actually had a pretty strong rise in the late Bronze Age, and then it had a steady decline at the end of it. So that was something that I wasn't expecting. I don't know why in my head everything was kind of just like slowly like trekking up, and then, you know, it kind of went down, which leads to the next takeaway that I already knew. I know so much about the Bronze Age already just because I've been researching it since I was obsessed with ancient Egypt as a child. Then I got into ancient Mesopotamia, and now we are in the Aegean. So I have always been obsessed with the Bronze Age. I didn't realize that if I probably ever went back to get my PhD, which I probably will not because I have an issue with authority, but that's not the discussion here, it would be to focus on the Bronze Age and probably Mesopotamia, which is why I'm like not really like, I'm trying to get my feet wet in the Aegean, because you talk to me about the ancient Near East, I am there. Talk to me about like the ancient Greek area, I am kind of lost. So I've been building up my research of the Aegean Bronze Age. And I knew this. I knew what I'm about to tell you. But it wasn't really internalized until I read the development in the Neolithic, the development throughout the early mid Bronze Age, even the beginning of the late Bronze Age. There was no singular cause of collapse for the Bronze Age. In fact, there is evidence of repopulation and of rebuilding, not to the same scale as when whatever civilization we're discussing was at the peak in the Bronze Age, right? But there is evidence of habitation, of repopulation. Eventually, many of these towns are abandoned. You see evidence of people fleeing inland, and that's when, you know, theories of invasion, migration, of danger start coming up. But truly, the collapse of the Bronze Age was no one sweeping incident, but it was many that piled up. And to simplify this and say that there was a single reason for the collapse is not only a gross oversimplification of a very complex system that had to fall apart for all of this to happen, but it's also kind of looking over all of the nuances. Not only were invasions and things of that nature one of the factors that could have caused the collapse of a civilization, if we keep in mind that war and upheaval was pretty common in the Bronze Age, like someone was always at war, just the way things go when you're expanding empires, right? We see a pattern in the essays from the Neolithic that when there is a shift in civilization, when there is a growth, or when there is a decline for growth in the future, there is usually a climate element and a socioeconomic element. So not only was there a climate event or a natural disaster, the eruption of Thera, there were also socioeconomic issues happening, perhaps a stress on the food system that led to civil unrest and an uprising against the ruling class. There is, you know, the infamous sea peoples that were migrating all over the Aegean. There are wars that are taking place, and evidence of smaller natural disasters that followed all of this to just compound the issue of possible famines, of civil unrest, of the collapse of the ruling class. So all of this just piled onto itself and led to the collapse of these very powerful city-states. As everything goes, with the collapse of one thing, another one rises. And there were other families that came to power, but they didn't come to power in the same capacity as the previous rulers. And this instability that continued even through the rebuilding and the repopulation of some cities can be seen in the early Iron Age. I don't know why it never occurred to me. So the Neolithic ends on a higher note than the collapse of the Bronze Age. We didn't have a collapse of the Neolithic. We had an evolution from a communal form of lifestyle to a more independent homestead-based lifestyle due to climate change and socioeconomic changes. So it was less of a decline and more of an evolution of society. Evolution is a strong word. More of a just transition in society from communal to more independent living. The Bronze Age was a decline. Civilization was struggling. There were droughts, there were famines, there were issues that affected the stability of peoples, of city-states. And I don't know why it didn't occur to me that if there's a collapse from one era to the next, then the next era starts at a low point. I don't know why in my mind it was just like a constant upward trajectory. It was not. So that was something else that I also found fascinating. Not only can you trace the repopulation and the rebuilding in the late Bronze Age as you kind of move into the Iron Age, but you can see it in the early Iron Age. That instability continued until I think like mid-early Iron Age. I'm not sure. I didn't get into that. But that was really fascinating to me. Shift. A socioeconomic shift. I should have read my notes. Not an evolution, because that's when we get inequality. A transition, a shift. It was a socioeconomic shift from the Neolithic to the Bronze Age. Should have read my notes. This next one's gonna be interesting. So I guess in my mind, every time you have a city, a village, or what have you, and a collection of people, especially if you're in a center of trade, in my mind, there are fortifications. Apparently, I have to go back. I have to go and fact check myself. Fortifications were not as common in the early Bronze Age as they are in the mid to late. And I say that because there is an essay that talks about the growing pattern of fortified cities that wasn't seen earlier. I found that very interesting because in my mind, if you're founding a city, if you're settling down somewhere, especially if you are a person of influence and you're kind of, you're plotting your way to the ruling class. In my mind, you want to fortify your city. You want to fortify your home. I'm not sure why that wasn't common. Perhaps there wasn't enough resources, enough manpower. People were just settling down. I mean, you don't want to do the dirty work yourself, right? You got to get the peasantry to do the work for you. So maybe that's why, joking aside though, I found it interesting that there was a distinct shift in patterns for building that researchers noticed the standardization, I would guess, or the more common practice of building fortifications and like ramparts and defense systems. So I found that very fascinating, particularly because I found out later reading about Troy. Troy, when it started as a little village in 3000 BC, it had fortifications from the very get-go versus other city-states that did not. I will have to fact check this because this was one of the most jarring, bizarre situations that I have to take into account when thinking of the trade routes, when thinking of the foreign relationships between everybody in the Aegean, in the Near East, and further out in the Bronze Age. I just find that fascinating. And Troy, hold up, is that my next one? Yes. And Troy, I found out, actually outlasted the Bronze Age. So Troy was founded at the beginning of the Bronze Age, around 3000 BCE. It continued to be in power all the way through like 950 CE, I want to say, 3000, 1000. Yeah, because it was around for almost 4,000 to 5,000 years. That's fascinating to me because while the Aegean did see a severe decline, Troy also obviously felt it because the climate change you don't just have like a volcano erupt and it only affects this many people, but the rest of the world's hunky-dory. That's not what happens. But Troy was able to recover when the Aegean city-states did not. I don't know if it's because Troy was on the mainland and part of the Hittite Empire. technically, which I didn't realize. I don't know why I didn't put it together, that if the Greeks were going to war with Troy, then obviously Troy wasn't an ally. I'm not sure. I don't know. This whole Helen situation just adds a layer of, I feel like it's a red herring. I don't believe, maybe. We'll get to that later. Anyways, Troy survived the Bronze Age, went into the Iron Age, into the Classical period, and I am fascinated to learn about it because not only was it fortified from the very beginning, it was also a very wealthy center of commerce, and it had grown to be enormous. And I want to learn about that. I want to learn about its role in the socio-political space. I want to learn about its influence. I want to learn about its relationship to the Hittite Empire, which is where it sat at the edge of Anatolia, and its just relationship with its Mycenaean neighbors that obviously ended up going to war with it. But why? Granted, people are petty, and I mean, you steal someone's queen, that's no bueno. Stuff does go down. But I don't want it to be that simple. I feel like there is a reason, much grander reason, that mobilized 1,100 and some odd ships, right? Which the logistics of it, let's ignore the fact that that's like near impossible, okay? There's a really fun, wait, am I at the end of my list? Okay, so that was a key takeaway. And more stuff that I have to learn. I only have 250 pages read of the 850 odd pages of the encyclopedia. So I still have a lot to learn, and I am so excited to learn it, right? But another note, and the last note that I'll call out, because if I kept talking about everything I learned, then I'd be here for another 4 hours. Y'all, Homer, okay? Homer was a poet. He is credited with writing the Iliad and the Odyssey. Also, total sidebar, why is it that the Odyssey's core story is about Odysseus' love for Penelope, but the Iliad's core story cannot be about Achilles' love for Patroclus? If anything, Homer was like, I got this story, I need to write one about this other couple. Why can't they both be love stories? Because that's what the Odyssey is. It's an adventure story, but it's about Odysseus getting back to Penelope and his kingdom, right? Why can't the Iliad be about Achilles and Patroclus? Because they're gay. That's why. That is a whole other issue. Not talking about that right now, but I was really pissed off. But I was like, why can that be? Why can a guy go for 10 years and travel the world and go through all these terrible trials to get back to his wife? God's forbid that one dude who is in love with this other dude go and kill this guy that killed his lover and avenge him. Obviously, that cannot be, but that's not what we're talking about, okay? It's a whole other rant, a whole other issue. Now, what I was going to say, Homer is credited with writing both the Iliad and the Odyssey. As I was reading, there are obviously historians of antiquity and, Trojan War and Homer contemporaries that have documented their role in the Trojan War, that have documented their time writing with Homer and things like that. It is hysterical when two historians, no, not two historians, let me tell you, hold up. I'm actually gonna bust out the book because this was just so funny. I thought it was funny because I'm a nerd. We should not lose sight of the fact that Homer was a poet, not a historian. The ancient commentators had no doubt about the fundamental truth of the Iliad and of the Trojan tradition in general. Nevertheless, they were sometimes skeptical about various aspects of the tradition, particularly as Homer presented it. Herodotus, for example, accepted the story Egyptian priests told them. Apparently, Helen never reached Troy. She was chilling in Egypt the whole time, per Herodotus. Then we got Thucydides. He had no doubts about the basic historicity of the Greek-Trojan conflict and cited Homer as his main source. However, he believed Homer, like other reciters of tales, was prone to exaggeration. According to Thucydides, Homer set the size of the Greek fleet at 1,200 ships. This is a rounded off figure, for the precise total obtained by adding together all of the vessels listed in Homer's Greek catalog of ships is actually 1,186. And Thucydides is like, you rounded. I find that so funny. I find it hilarious that Homer, who wrote about the last couple of weeks of a 10-year conflict, he wrote about the last 51 days to be precise. His account is limited to just 6 days, with 4 days of fighting and 2 days of truce, okay? He wrote about that very limited time. And even then, you got ancient historians that were like, you know what, that's a good story, but it is so inaccurate. You got people fact checking you even in ancient times. I think it's so funny that ancient historians were like, oh, that's a cute story, but that's not actually what happened. Good story though, good lines. I just found that hilarious. I just made a note here, like Thucydides did not appreciate Homer rounding up, which I'm sure there are other reasons for it, and I'm sure I'll uncover them as I go, but I just think it's hysterical. Also, what are we doing in Troy if Helen is in Egypt? Menelaus, get your ass to Egypt. What are you doing there, bro? Like, if the entire purpose of the Trojan War was to go get Helen back, get sailing to Egypt, my guy. Like, that's where she is with Paris. Like, apparently just on an Egyptian vacation for 10 years while everybody's over here, like, besieging Troy. Could have saved a lot of heartache if we just all moved to Egypt. But then Egypt might have totally, like, pushed her in. They might not have messed around. But it's just so funny that Herodotus was just like, oh, cool story. That's not what happened. Good story though. I love the adaptation, the interpretation, the AU of your story, bro. Really good. So it's just funny. And I can't wait to uncover other little Easter eggs like that. So it's been a really fun, entertaining read, which is not usually what people say like with encyclopedias. I might just be that nerdy. I'm probably just that nerdy. Oh, and wait, I sent my friend this. Okay, I dropped my little index card. Hold on. This. I have these for every single book that I read. Well, not every single one. I have smaller versions of these, but if it's a book that I'm going to be referencing, I kind of create my own little index section of stuff that I'm wanting to track. So that's what these are. But I was actually really intimidated going into this book. I was terrified of all of the acronyms. I was terrified of like LM2AB or something like that. And I was like, I have no idea what that means. And I felt candidly just unintelligent. So I'm just like, okay, we are starting from literally the preface. From page 1, we're not skipping a single page until we understand what we're reading. Because I'm like, I am an intelligent person. I can totally do this. But I had my doubts. So as I was reading the intro by Eric H. Klein, who is the editor of this book, let's see. What did he say? This book is aimed at professionals who teach undergraduate and graduate courses on the Bronze Age Aegean, as well as advanced undergraduate and graduate students taking such courses, and a select portion of the interested general public. That's me. I found that so cute. I found that so nice. Like, and for anybody that's like nerdy enough to want to read an encyclopedia, like, present. So I thought that was really fun. And I swear to God, I'm probably the only person that has this much fun with an encyclopedia. But you know, I ain't hurting nobody. I'm literally just reading an encyclopedia on my own time. Also, thank you to my amazing friend that got this for me. I am having such a blast. I love, love, love this book. That is it for this video about my key takeaways on my 3-day focus study. I'm actually having a focus study on the Tale of Genji because that guy is still going. But I need a couple of days of just focusing to not only read, but kind of get my thoughts together because it has been a minute. I think I got up to page 300-ish. We'll see the progress I'll make on my next focus study. And because I'm such a nerd and I love planning everything, I have my backlog for 2026 drafted already, y'all. That is how much planning I do. I have this huge project planned for next July. I never take time off. I am a workaholic, obviously is what I do on my free time. But I have a 4-day weekend planned next summer in 2026. And God's willing, everything goes well. I am going to be outlining in the most interactive way I have ever outlined before. I've never done this before, but I want to try it with the Bronze Age retelling because I have so much to cover, because I need to cover Mycenae, Troy, and I want to add, because it's fantasy, I want to write an element of the gods. So there is so much happening and so many moving pieces and so many characters. I am going to create a giant craft book of an outline. And I already told my friend, hey, be ready to bind this for me. It's going to be 500 to 600 pages long. Get ready. And I told her, I'm like, I might have foldouts because I might need supplemental maps. So it's going to be an undertaking. And I am so excited. So that is next year. So right now I'm world building, right now I'm character profiling, I'm studying trade routes so that next year, after I read the Iliad, and I want to try to get through the Odyssey before I outline, because the Odyssey takes place 10 years after the Trojan War, and it covers all of these natural disasters that Odysseus has to go through. What does that say? What does it mean? Total side note, every time that I'm just like, but what does that mean? I feel like Jack Skellington when he's trying to figure out what Christmas is, and he's like, but what does it mean? Like, that's me at every turn. So I'm just like, what does this mean, Odysseus? So in an ideal world, I will read the Iliad and the Odyssey. Hold up. I feel like my math's not mathing. Hold up. My timeline, my chronologies. All right. Handy planner. Let's see. My mic probably all got jacked up. Okay. All right. So Quinn Q1 is February, March, April. I will be reading March of the Mammoths. Quinn Q2. Darn, y'all. Crap. Quinn Q2 is May, June, July, August, September, October, November. Quinn Q2 is May, June, July. Quinn Q3 is August, September, October. I wanted a 6-month focus period. Ooh. I might not be able to do March of the Mammoths next year. Or maybe I can. For March of the Mammoths next year, I'm reading Anna Karenina. And quite frankly, I don't expect a whole lot of output coming out of that. So February, I'm gonna be reading essays and supplemental texts of Anna Karenina. March, I'm gonna be reading Anna Karenina. And then if I just do April, May, June to read the Iliad, that's 3 months to read the Iliad, and then get through some of the Odyssey or like the high points of the Odyssey. I could buy an abridged version of the Odyssey and get through the high points and then keep reading it through the rest of the months. Because July is when I get my 4-day weekend, and I need to have read those books, and I need to have read a bunch of other supplemental texts. I'm actually reading everything I can get my hands on regarding anything about the Bronze Age so that I can understand and process it and see if it teaches me anything. Okay. So next year's March of the Mammoths, not gonna have a whole lot of output. I'm gonna end it in March and just be normal about it and start reading the Iliad in April, May, June. That gives me 3 months, which should be plenty of time. I say that, which should be enough time to be ready for July. Okay, and then I'll have my 6-month study end in September. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, so to go April through September, and then October, November, December will be fine. Okay, that works. For now. Anyway, slightly derailed. That is it for this video. I'm probably gonna have just like a Bronze Age playlist, and I don't know. I might do like mini vlogs per essay that I really like. Again, with that, I need to paperclip this in. Okay, I might do mini vlogs per essay. I haven't figured it out. I might do mini vlogs per essay if I really find that it benefits my research. I might do that, and I'll just like ad hoc upload that. That's just gonna be ongoing. Does anybody like the Bronze Age? Does anybody want to talk to me about the Bronze Age? What other books do you recommend that I read? Because I'm reading everything I can get my hands on about the Trojan War, the Bronze Age, Troy itself, and now, hold up, there's a guy, Trevor Bryce. There is a professor who is in here. There is a professor who is in here named Trevor Bryce that is a Hittitologist. So I'm gonna actually be reading some of his to learn about the Hittite Empire and like Anatolia. That's it for this video though. That's enough, otherwise I'm gonna keep talking. That's it for this video. I'll catch you guys next time. Bye!